I'm Natasha Kirchek, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, an assassination attempt in Gaza threatens Palestinian reconciliation. Israel braces for the possibility of early elections. And I can finally check out that crazy song you told me about because we officially have Spotify here in the Holy Land. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Today's Knesset meetings could very well dissolve the current government and call for snap elections this summer. The Israeli Prime Minister has voiced a compromise on the ultra-Orthodox drafting into the IDF. But analysts say this may all be for show and that Netanyahu is actually pushing for those elections behind closed doors.
אם יהיו בחירות, נתמודד בהן וגם ננצח. אבל אנחנו עוד לא שם. השעה מאוחרת, אבל לא מאוחרת מדי. צריך לעשות מאמץ עליון אחרון, כדי לשמור על הממשלה בהרכבה הנוכחי לאורך זמן.
The latest polls put Netanyahu's Likud party as a dominant force if snap elections were indeed held in the coming months. Many critics have pointed out that Netanyahu, who is embroiled in numerous corruption scandals, may prefer elections now before possible criminal indictments come in. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has remained adamantly against the ultra-Orthodox party's bid to draft a bill preventing Haredim from being conscripted in the army. Lieberman is the linchpin that threatens to topple the government. It turns out someone else may actually be gunning for his job already. Likud MK Miri Regev has just told Israeli media that she hopes to be promoted to defense minister in the next government. Adding fuel to the speculation that Netanyahu may merely be putting on a show as he called for unity, Regev was actually caught on camera texting one of her assistants during a Knesset meeting. Cancel the hotel, elections are on. Today will certainly be a decisive day. Snap elections in Israel could become a reality very soon, so let's check out what the latest polls have to say if the elections were to be held today. Now, remember, these figures are only estimates, but they do provide some very concrete insight into where the public currently stands. In the most recent polls, Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party would continue to remain on top, retaining almost all of its current seats in the Knesset. The Likud's main opposition party, the Zionist Union, however, could possibly lose as many as half of its chairs, dropping from 24 today down to 13 or even 11. It looks like the centrist Yesh Atid party, headed by one of Netanyahu's biggest rivals, Yair Lapid, would then step up to fill that gap, possibly doubling its seats from 11 to 22 or 24. The ultra-Orthodox parties and the Arab Joint List would likely shift a few single seats here or there, but remain relatively intact. But it's Moshe Kahlon's Kulanu party that would possibly lose the most, dropping from 10 seats down to 6. On the left, the Meretz party is seeded to win big, gaining as many as 3 to 4 chairs. Now, some polls do chart things a bit differently than others. One X factor here is that several newer parties may or may not clear the required 3.25% voter threshold to enter the Knesset. So that could shake up a few of the individual seats. But overall, it's clear why many suspect Netanyahu may secretly be fixing for these early elections, because these numbers place him well ahead of his opponents, and potentially in a very comfy position to arrange a new coalition. Breaking news from Gaza. The Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, Rami Hamdallah, was visiting the Strip this morning when an explosion detonated near his envoy. Several have been reportedly injured, although Hamdallah himself is unharmed. The Prime Minister was in the Strip to help celebrate the opening of a wastewater treatment plant. At this time, no group has claimed any attempted attack, but like Israel, the Palestinian Authority holds Hamas responsible for all aggressions in the Strip. This potential assassination attempt comes at a time when the PA's reconciliation attempts with Hamas have already been stagnating for months. Though we have seen some major concessions from both parties to form a unity government, namely the PA resuming major presence in the Strip, reported infighting has brought discussions to a crawl. Details of this explosion still remain scarce, but as the dust settles, it's clear that this incident will likely make matters even more tense, if it doesn't kill Palestinian reconciliation outright.
ذهبنا اليوم حصل ما حصل كانت بالفعل محاولة مرتبة جيدة كانت عبوات مزروعة على عمق 2 متر داخل الارض، هذا ما وصلنا فيه بالطريقه الدعم للسلام، ولكن قدر الله المسلم كان هنالك 6 اصابات بين الحرس الان يعالج حفظ الله.
Joining us now in the studio with more on the attempted assassination of the Palestinian Prime Minister is Senior Research Associate with the Institute for National Security Studies, Brigadier General Shlomo Blum. Thanks for joining us. So, first of all, do you think that there's any coincidence that this bomb went off near the Prime Minister, or are you convinced that this cannot be a coincidence?
No, it's not a coincidence. It's an assassination attempt. It was not so successful.
Can you give us any insight as to who you think is responsible for this? Who has the most to gain from his death?
There are so many candidates. It's very difficult to guess which one of them did it. Starting from Muhammad Dahlan, the ex-Fatah member that was expelled from the movement, and he is the bitter rival of the current leadership of the Palestinian Authority. Moving over to some rivals of the current leader of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar. Because of the failure of his pet project, which is the reconciliation with Fatah, he succeeded in agitating many rivals within the movement that think that he made a mistake. And I think they can consider such an attempt to torpedo reconciliation.
Well, regardless of who...
And of course, the crazy Salafist, jihadists, etc.
Well, that's what I want to get at. I mean, regardless of who is really responsible, the PA is blaming Hamas, just like Israel blames Hamas for any violence that is coming from the Gaza Strip into Israel. Do you think... I mean, the question is not whether or not this is fair, but what that means for the future of reconciliation.
I don't think that will determine the fate of reconciliation. I think that reconciliation faces much more serious challenges that pertain to the real issues of reconciliation. There are very serious disagreements between the two parties.
So the likelihood of a reconciliation happening in your mind is not something that is going to be happening very soon?
The likelihood of full reconciliation is not going to happen soon. It is possible that they will continue with this kind of semi-reconciliation because the alternative is worse.
Right. Well, I guess the question is, will we be seeing more inter-Palestinian attacks like this one?
No, I don't think it will be a common phenomenon. I think there is in the Palestinian society, there is a great reluctance for being involved in fratricide, fighting between in the family.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have to wait and see what happens. Israel's High Court has just made a huge ruling in a very controversial case. Last summer, 15 Jewish families entered and occupied a disputed building in Hebron. The families say they legally purchased the majority of the structure, but when the original Palestinian owners claimed otherwise, it sparked a major debate. Well, now the verdict is finally in, and a judge has declared that the families cannot yet move inside, giving the IDF the green light to forcibly remove them if necessary. The case actually goes back several years. The building is located just next door to the Holy Cave of the Patriarch in Hebron. And these families first moved back in 2012, but were evicted by Israeli security forces. They moved back in a year later, but agreed to leave on the condition that the property would be registered legally in their name. Failure to produce a legal chain of title over the property has entangled the case in red tape. And just last summer, the family moved back in, claiming things were just taking too long. They also demanded that the Palestinian family of the original owner, who still lives in a portion of the building, be barred from the premises. The High Court has also rejected this demand, which means this could be the third time these families are removed. The Israeli government remains firmly set on carrying out its controversial plan to deport nearly 40,000 African asylum seekers from the country. The first wave of those deportations are scheduled for the end of this month. In line with that deadline, the state has just shut down the Cholot detention center, where thousands of African migrants have been detained in and out over the last few years. ILTV's Brett Allen Smith is here with the update on this. And Brett, what does it mean now that Cholot is officially being closed?
Well, as you said, this falls right into place with the government scheduled to start those deportations. Now, closing Cholot essentially exploits a kind of loophole in the law which says that the state cannot forcibly deport asylum seekers without giving them an alternative. Cholot was kind of that alternative up until now, so by closing it, it eliminates the choice, and by that logic makes deportation a legal option. Again, this is by their logic.
Cholot was only opened a few years ago in response to this situation,
Right.
but I do know that at least a quarter of all African asylum seekers in Israel have spent at least some time there
Sure.
at some point. And it's essentially an open-air prison, right?
Right. Well, originally it was supposed to be kind of like a holding center while the government reviewed their requests for refugee status. But asylum seekers actually couldn't legally file those requests for many years, and even now, many years later, the vast majority of requests remain unanswered. I mean, this case is still being heard today in the courts. Just yesterday, one of the presiding judges confessed how frustrated he was that the state couldn't really explain those delays. So imagine being one of these asylum seekers waiting years for an answer, or...
Which again will point out that on one hand, the majority are Christians from Eritrea and Sudan who say they fled genocide for a better life in Israel. But on the other hand, the government says they're essentially only here to get jobs, which is why for now only single men of working age are being targeted for deportation. I mean, that's the heart of the debate that we typically hear here, right?
Sure. I mean, a big court decision last week kind of hurts the government's argument there, I will say, because a judge just ruled that, like in practically every other country, Israel has to recognize now that Eritreans who fled their country because of the army draft, they do qualify as refugees. And for the average man in Eritrea, you're conscripted into what many say is a slave army as soon as you hit 18 years old, many of them for the rest of their lives.
Does the closing of Cholot mean we're headed towards a showdown then when that April 1st deadline actually begins, the deportations?
Right. Well, it's kind of hard to say, but that's kind of what many in this community are really bracing for. And then we're seeing protests pretty regularly now on a daily basis against those deportations, kind of more and more public support starting to rally behind the refugee cause. And remember, Israel is still in talks with the UN to avoid what could be a very disastrous PR nightmare if they choose to move ahead with this. And that's why, everyone from doctors to American diplomats, even Holocaust survivors here have urged government not to do this and to stop the deportations.
All right, Brett. Well, thanks for joining us with the update.
Sure.
Massive demonstrations have just broken out in front of the Knesset. Hundreds of Ethiopian immigrants are demanding the government to finally fulfill its promise and reunite them with around 8,000 of their family members who are still in Ethiopia. This is a long and controversial issue that's been decades in the making. Back in the 80s and 90s, the state conducted undercover operations to airlift thousands of Ethiopians with Jewish ancestry to Israel. A few decades later, roughly 140,000 Ethiopian Israelis now live in the country. But many say the state has done little to help them integrate, even accusing the government of racist policies and ignoring police brutality. Infamously, Ethiopian protesters clashed violently with Israeli police after a video went viral showing an Ethiopian IDF soldier apparently being beaten by police. The government halted its operations from Ethiopia over 20 years ago, but has promised to bring nearly 8,000 of those new immigrants' family members to Israel. Families here in Israel say they've been waiting for over a decade now for that promise to be fulfilled, leaving parents and children separated across an entire continent. The Israeli government maintains there just aren't enough funds available to bring in these 8,000, but with the total cost estimated to be less than 0.1% of next year's budget, many critics are saying racism is the only reason this isn't a priority. Now, this may sound strange, but here in Israel, there's no such thing as a civil marriage. To get legally married in Israel, your marriage must be ordained by an approved rabbi from the rabbinate. In other words, if you aren't considered Jewish according to halakhic law, you can't legally get married in Israel. 20% of Israelis fall into the category, and today there are over 83,000 common law couples in Israel that maintain a joint home and are even raising children, but just aren't married. Now, rabbis from across the religious spectrum are calling for the institutionalization of civil marriages. And here with me in the studio to discuss this complex issue is Rabbi Meir Azari of Beit Daniel, Tel Aviv, and Rabbi Ronen Neuwirth, the chairman of the Vehavta Tel Aviv Jewish Experience. All right, guys, so let's begin with why civil unions aren't allowed in Israel. Why is that the case?
Okay, I'm an Orthodox rabbi. I officiated till this very day more than 800 weddings, all of them free of charge. And I believe in the Orthodox ceremony, we can do it in a very user-friendly way, meaningful way that can connect people to the heritage, to be on one hand loyal to the tradition, at the very same time something that can be very meaningful and relevant for people, for our generation. That being said, I strongly believe that this should not be the only option. We should let people choose, and I'm positive that if we'll let people choose, even more people will choose the traditional ceremony. I have a very simple proof. Let's take Yom Kippur as an example. Let's take Brit Milah. There's no law forcing people not to drive on Yom Kippur. There's no law forcing people to perform circumcision, Brit Milah. A vast majority of Israelis do this out of choice, not out of force. I do believe in the Orthodox ceremonies. I do believe that most Israelis will prefer these ceremonies. But the fact that there's no other legal option, I see this as something which is problematic, and that's why the results...
I'd like to hear his response to this, yeah.
I had the chance to serve in more than 2,000 weddings, mostly for couple that had no problem to get married at the chief rabbinate, but they choose a reform ceremony because they want to emphasize the egalitarian relationship between the men and the women. They won't go anymore to the chief rabbinate. Rabbis like Eli Sadan, we heard his words recently about the role of women in Jewish life, the role of women in modernity life. This is not an option. Those rabbis and that concept of only one way is not anymore satisfied many Jewish Israeli couples. There are hundreds of reform weddings and another hundreds of conservative weddings in Israel. More and more people choose the alternative way. The alternative way is Jewish. And my challenge to my friend at the Orthodox world, why are you afraid from competition? Open the door for civil marriage, reform, conservative. Make sure that...
Well, we're also talking about two different issues here, because there's the issue of young people who just don't feel that they identify as much with Orthodox Judaism, and then you have...
And there are many couples that do not have the ability to get married at the chief rabbinate.
Somebody who makes aliyah or immigrates here but comes from the father's side.
Think about just the couple that I've met earlier today. He is 30 years old, came from Belarus while he was 3 years old, served all his life in Israel, army, school. I mean, this is what he knows. Mm-hmm. He can't bring a certain paper from Belarus, who is sitting there to give the paper? And the whole journey has to be different. Well, we are able to serve these people. The chief rabbinate are not able to serve those people. We would like to offer him maybe an easy way to convert. We open the door here and there. This is the role of Reform Judaism all over the world.
Well, what is your take on that, the idea of making the process easier for people whose Jewish identity isn't as clear according to the Jewish Halachic law?
So I'm a member of Tzor organization. And the organization is doing extensive efforts. First of all, in terms of weddings, there are tens of thousands of weddings under capacity of Tzor that has been done in the previous 20 years, trying to do exactly like what was said before.
But Rabbi Ronen, you know that Tzor wedding is an Orthodox wedding. In the end of the day,
I'm an Orthodox rabbi.
The man is buying his wife. This is the ketubah. This is the concept behind the ketubah.
On the contrary, the ketubah.
There's one side that sell. There's one side that buy. You sit as a rabbi in a small ceremony, a few minutes before the ceremony, the main ceremony. Next to a table with the father of the bride and the groom.
I'd like to hear your take on this.
Yes. So that's a misperception. The ketubah is exactly the opposite. Mm-hmm. The husband is not buying the woman, not according to the halach. It's a misperception. On the contrary, the ketubah is an agreement that was established to protect women's rights.
You're right, but at the same time, the ketubah that you bring from the chief rabbinate, in the front says shtar kinyan, which means ownership. It's an ownership.
It's not an ownership.
This is the document. And for a woman living here in Tel Aviv, working in the morning as a doctor, physician in the hospital, or a lawyer, or in the high-tech industry, the concept that somebody is buying and somebody is selling her, it's not, I know the explanation.
Disagree, but the halachic status is exactly the opposite. The husband is not buying the woman, is enslaving and mortgaging all his assets and possessions to protect the rights of his wife.
Right,
That's the idea of the ketubah.
But you agree that the name is Shtar Kinyan.
the-
The document that we're signing is Shtar Kinyan.
Maybe on some of them, not the ones that I usually use, and the way I explain what I do, and the halachic status is very different. It's exactly the opposite of what you were
All right.
describing. And I believe.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and I'd love to let you finish, but I think this is an issue that we can go on about for hours. The bottom line is kind of figuring out where the line is, right? How are we going to make sure that more young people feel
I think that the
comfortable
bottom
getting
line
married
should
in the way
be
that they would
call
like to get
people to
married?
choose, call people to
Right.
practice a decision, to choose after you learn, you study, go to the Orthodox rabbi, go to the Reform rabbi, do whatever in the end of the day your heart says to you. This is
All
it.
right, well,
I'm in favor of,
thanks.
of choices. Nevertheless, within the Orthodoxy, there are many rabbis. Thousands of rabbis are trying to do something different, something relevant, something meaningful for the people, and they are definitely making a change. Rabbis of Tzor, and I'm proud to be one of them.
All right, thank you so much for joining us both. All right, today there are absolutely no diplomatic ties between Israel and Indonesia, but get this, a Muslim man has just opened a course offering the country's very first Hebrew lessons. And the bottom line is, you can't reach peace if you don't at least talk it out. So we'd say this is a very good start. Indonesia is the largest Muslim-majority country in the world, and it's a place where people are still openly hostile to even the idea of friendship with the Jewish state. That's the prejudiced 52-year-old Sapri Saleh has known his entire life, up until he started studying Arabic literature in Cairo in the 90s. This was about a decade after Egypt formally signed a peace treaty with Israel, so that's where he first started seeing behind what he calls the negative stigma about Israel blinding his countrymen. He took it upon himself to learn Hebrew just out of curiosity, and just a few years ago published the first ever Hebrew-Indonesian dictionary. With over 35,000 entries, the book gained an odd sort of success in Indonesia, even being praised by local religious leaders and imams. Sapri's new Hebrew course is another historic first in his country. Around 20 students made up of Muslims and Christians have just spent the last several weeks learning the basics of the Aleph Bet. Sapri says most of them are either eager to read the Christian Bible in its original language or just plain curious to learn about a new culture. And given the similarities between Arabic and Hebrew, this is an idea that might not only take root but could also grow into something truly world-changing. Something life-changing has happened here in Israel. Get ready for it. Spotify has just officially launched its streaming service here in Israel. That means that Israelis can join the 159 million people around the world who are listening in. If you don't know what Spotify is, download it immediately. The music streaming service offers 35 million songs and tailor-made playlists for every moment of your life. And now that it's launched in Israel, Spotify is boasting playlists specifically made for Israel, including Israel's top hits, New Mediterranean, Hip Hop Generation, and Israeli Weekend. Now that the service has launched, Spotify is available in 62 different countries with 71 million paying customers. The breadth of how big Spotify's following is especially cool since many of the playlists are curated by fans, meaning you could be listening to your favorite hits and discovering new ones with millions of other people from across the planet. Spotify is offering an ad-free premium subscription service for just under 20 shekels or $5.50. Spotify was launched back in 2006 by Ek and Martin Lorentzen in Sweden, and its value is estimated to be as much as $23.4 billion. The music streaming service has twice as many users as its rival Apple Music, and now it's about to have a lot more Israelis. All right, and now for our Hebrew word of the day. I don't know if you know this, but it's hard coming up with the word of the day. So sometimes we pick a word at random. And that's why today's word actually is akra'i, meaning random. Sometimes dvarim, akraim, or random things seem to happen to us. Other times they only look akra'i, but are actually just haphazard. Lucky for us, the word for haphazard is akra'i too. And now for some machshavot akriot, or random thoughts. Pennies, blue. The Louisiana Purchase, cats. All right, now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight will be fairly warm with a low of 56 or 13 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect sunny skies and a slight rise in temperatures to a high of 73 or 23 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.44 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for watching.